Okay, thank you for still being here and for the last session. My name is Hao Liang. I'm now based in Singapore. This is a joint work with Luc Renenbuch and Kara, both of them at Tilburg, and Kara is now sitting there. So we are sort of doing this as, we are dividing the task. I'm mainly in charge of presentation, and she will try to take more questions afterwards. And the reason we end up working together is because I used to be at Tilburg for quite a while. So this paper is on a little bit different angle. It's on employees in corporate governance. So, So the idea is that we know that modern corporations represent a nexus of implicit, explicit contracts between different parties, especially between shareholders and stakeholders, and among whom most important stakeholder group is the employees, because they are involved in daily operations. They have a contractual claims from the firm in the form of salary, you have to pay them. And also they are actively involved, especially in some countries, they are actively involved in corporate governance. So they sit on the board, they have labor unions, they have stock options, they can launch strikes, and they can even do political lobbying. So a central question on the role of employees is how do they matter for firm value? And this is an important question because it matters for the ongoing debate on the role of stakeholders in corporate governance. So we kind of group the existing theories in two categories. One is those employees or labor in general, they are bad from the shareholders' perspective. They can be viewed as a cost. Because usually employees, they try to maximize the different objective functions than that of the shareholders. And if you protect employees too well, that makes the firm difficult to lay out those employees, and shareholders have to pay the price. Sometimes managers may even collaborate or collude with the employees, paying them high salary, providing good welfare, making them difficult to be fired so as to entrench the manager themselves. So this is so-called manager-employee alliance or manager-employee collusion. So this photo illustrates these ideas, right? Employees are never happy, so they want to higher pay, they want to strike, so shareholders may not like it. And the opposite view is that employees are important human capital. So in order to make profit, the first thing is to make your employees happy so they increase their productivity, which will later on translate into higher firm value. And this picture illustrates the idea. If as a manager you want to make money, the first thing you should do is to make your employees happy. But to date, based on our research on the existing literature, I think there are mixed theoretical predictions and empirical evidence in terms of how the employees may shape firm value, whether they are cost or whether they are important human capital. There are several reasons. So first is there is a limited data in terms of firm level employee engagement and how firms treat their employees and how employees behave. Also, the role of employees may vary across countries. So existing studies mostly look at US firms. So I'm in the finance faculty. In finance, I think our research is pretty US-centric. Or some other studies, they look at German firms because in Germany there's this special co-determination rule that employees have to sit on the supervisory board. So this provides ideal setting to study how they influence corporate decision makings. But beyond US and Germany, I think we know relatively little about the role of employees, although in different jurisdictions, their roles can vary a lot. Oops. So we try to address these issues, both theoretically and empirically. So theoretically, we extend the theories about employee incentives, and we also focus on this so-called inalienability, hopefully I pronounce it correctly, of human capital, which is an important concept in corporate finance. And empirically, we utilize a newly assembled data set for firms on firm level employee engagement around the world. And with this data set, we can get detailed information on how the firms deal with labor-related issues in terms of in terms of employment quality, how much they pay to their employees and how much job security they provide to their employees. In terms of the diversity in their workforce, in terms of health and safety of the workforce, and in terms of training and development of their employees. So let me briefly illustrate. So first, theoretically, what does this inalienability of human capital means? So this started from, if I'm not wrong, Hart and Moore, 1994. So they proposed this theory and they study the role of the human capital of entrepreneurs on the debt structure of the firm. And we basically extend this view to rank and file employees. So especially in high-tech companies nowadays, it's not only the human capital of entrepreneurs matter, but also those of regular employees, especially high-skilled employees that matter a lot. So the idea is that entrepreneurs and employees, they cannot irrevocably commit themselves to the firm, and their skills cannot be easily transferred to other firms, even if they leave. So the benefits and the cost of employee engagement at the firm level depends on how easy they can transfer their skills and human capital across firms and across different environments. So we try to use this kind of conception to reconcile some of the conflict findings in the literature. So because human capital has this inalienability nature, so we argue that at the firm level, a firm's employment policy also have this inalienability nature. So the inalienability of employment policy refers to the frictions in transferring employee-related policies. This stem from the inalienability of human capital. So our argument, our basic hypothesis is that employee engagement by the firm, so a firm's engagement in employee-related issues, they can enhance labor productivity and firm value when such inalienability is low. But this engagement can be very costly when the inalienability is high, because it generates greater uncertainties regarding integrating workforce, integrating employees and labor contracts, especially during a firm's restructuring. So this is our basic hypothesis. So how do we test this hypothesis? So first we focus on takeovers, because takeover provides us a setting, empirical setting, that firms have to restructure their workforce. So they need to reshuffle the employees. So the firm's implicit or explicit contract with their employees become more important during this process. Second, we focus on the announcement returns by the acquirer. So we focus on acquirer, firstly is for the data availability reason, but also we believe from the acquirer's perspective, when they make a decision of taking over another firm, they do take into account of how easily they can transfer the skills or human capital of their employees and the employment policies to the target firm, how they can integrate the policies between different firms. And also we look at abnormal returns, because if you believe in the efficient market hypothesis, this reflects what's going to happen and how shareholders perceive this integration after the merger. Finally, we focus on two types of takeovers. So we focus on domestic takeovers versus cross-border takeovers. The reason is that they reflect different levels of uncertainty in terms of integrating the human capital and employment policies. And they also map with the idea of inalienability I just mentioned. So we argue that in domestic takeovers, such inalienability is low, whereas in cross-border takeovers, this inalienability is relatively high. And that makes a difference on how those policies can affect firm value. So just a preview of the results that, so after analyzing a large international sample and based on detailed firm level information on their engagement in labor issues, we found that among different aspects of labor engagement, employee engagement, employment quality, especially in terms of monetary incentive and job security, they are positively related to announcement returns. Oops, I keep on pressing the wrong button. Overall, stronger employment quality is related to higher announcement returns, but this effect is attenuated if the deal is conducted across national border. Or to put it in other words, the correlation between a firm's employee engagement and announcement return is positive in domestic deals, but when it turns into cross-border deals, this relationship turns into negative. And we try to explore a few channels and rule out a few alternative explanations. So the channel we focus on is how the firm can incentivize employees and what's the uncertainty about the firm using certain policy to incentivize their employees. At the incentive level, we found that the effects mostly come from how much the firm pay the employees. So it's mostly from the monetary incentives rather than how secure the job conditions are for the employees. And we also look at the uncertainty part in terms of the inalienability of human capital, especially in cross-border deals. We found that the attenuating effect in cross-border deals become weaker when the uncertainties regarding integrating employment policies become are further reduced, or there's less uncertainty. So we look at repeat acquisitions in the same country. We look at target countries more right-wing oriented. We also look at target countries' culture, which are more incentive-oriented and less union-oriented. And we found that this will reduce the attenuating effect of cross-border deals. And then later on, we also studied the long-run effect in terms of accounting returns. And we found that the short-term stock market effect persists in the long run after the merger. Quickly about the data. So the data we use is similar to what Pedro was presenting yesterday. So similar data set called ISAT4, developed by Thomson Reuters. So it's an ESG data set, environment, social governance data. And it now covers, I believe nowadays it's already more than 6,000 firms. At the time we downloaded the data, it was about 5,000 firms. And we focus on the social dimension. So we don't care about environments. We don't care about the governance part. We care about the social part. And a firm's engagement in employee issues is part of the social dimension. It's a score. It's a rating at the industry level. So they compare firms in the same industry across the globe, and they rank which firm is the best in this regard and which firm is the worst. So it's industry-adjusted data ranging from 0 to 100 with the mean of 50. And the data on takeovers is from standard database, SDC. So overall, we have more than 2,000 firms from acquiring firms from 48 countries, and they engage in more than 4,500 takeover deals. So they are repeat takeovers over 11 years, from 2003 to 2014. The key dependent variable in most of our regressions is the abnormal return over 3 days around the takeover announcement by the acquirer. And throughout all the regressions, we try to control for the effect of labor regulation by using this country-level labor regulation index developed by Botaro, Junkov, Laporta, Selanis, Schleifer, etc., which captures what's the country's employment laws in terms of contracts, dismissal, working hours for their employees, bargaining power by the union, so that's the collective relations law, social security laws, and the civil rights index. So we control for all this in all the regressions so as to tease out this is not a regulation effect, but more of a firm's engagement effect. Okay, so a little bit more about the data set. I think yesterday when Pedro was presenting, there were some questions about from where the data company got the information. So apparently the data company checked the company's annual report, and they check from domestic sources, but they also have sources from international agencies and NGOs, and also from the news, such as Times. So they basically the data is from all kinds of sources, and they assemble this data together and to give a firm a rating. And then, so this is a picture, probably it looks a little bit familiar because I just copied from Pedro's slides. So you have E, environment, you have S, social, and you have G, governance. And we focus on S. And within S, you have employees-related issues, and you also have other issues. For example, a firm's engagement in community, product responsibility. And we ignore them, we mostly focus on employee-related issues. So we focus on the employment quality, and this is about how much the firm pays its employees and job securities. health and safety, training and development, and workforce diversity. We are not focusing on human capital because this usually relates to how the firm outsource their production in third world countries and whether they have special attention on child labor, etc., in those countries. So for the sake of time, I'm going to skip some descriptive statistics. What I want to say here is just that we look at the numbers in cross-border deals and domestic deals. On average, a firm's employee engagement is higher, significantly higher in cross-border deals. And on other financial dimensions and deal level variables, they are comparable. And we also look at target firms, but because of data coverage, most of the data are available for acquirers, but not really for targets. That's also partially the reason we focus on acquirers, but in robustness checks, we do look into targets reactions. So this is the main table we want to present. So basically what we do is we regress the announcement returns over 3 days on a firm's cross-border dummy and interacting this cross-border dummy with the rating of the acquiring firm's employment quality score. So what we want to focus on is this interaction on third row. And of course, the second row is also something that we test. So overall, the main effect of employment quality is positive. But this effect is attenuated or becomes weaker when the deal is conducted cross-border. And first time when I present this, and then I got a question that this is just that firms conducting cross-border deals, they are doing bad deals. So cross-border itself destroy value. But apparently this is not what the data tells us. Because if you look at the coefficient on the cross-border per se, they are positive and they are highly significant. So our argument is that this attenuating effect does not come from cross-border per se, but comes from what cross-border brings to the nature of employment quality, to a firm's employee engagement. And then if we look at other dimensions of employee engagement, health and safety, workforce diversity, training and development, we don't see any effects. So basically most of the effects of employee engagement comes from employment quality. So I repeat, employment quality measures a firm's monetary incentive and job security they provide to their employees. Then we further disentangle this employment quality, which is the only significant variable that relates to firm value. So we disentangle employment quality into 2 categories. One is about monetary incentive, and we look at the firms providing bonus plan, fringe benefits, the wage of employees relative to the CEO. And the second category is job security factors. And we look at trade union relationships, new job creation, so which is net of the layoff to the employees, and whether the firm has other policies related to job securities. So this kind of classification is not invented by us, but some management scholars, Herzberg, so at least here, they also propose similar things, that the way employees can be motivated depends on 2 broad factors. One is the so-called motivational factors, which match with our monetary incentive factors, and the other is so-called maintenance factors, which match with our job security factors. And what do we find? We find that, this panel A, is mostly for monetary incentives. So monetary incentives, we found that it has a strong effect similar to the general effect of employment quality I just showed in the baseline table. So bonus plan is positive, but the effect is attenuated in cross-border deals. Fringe benefit, similar results. The wage of CEO, similar results. Now the sign flips because this is the ratio of employee to CEO. So the lower this ratio is, means the better, sorry, how to say that? The lower, the higher this ratio is, the better the employees are. No, the lower this ratio is, the more the employees. Sorry, I got a little bit confused. But this measures how well the employees are paid. And then if we look at the job security factors, so this is panel B, and we again interact these job security factors with the cross-border dummy, we don't find anything. So we don't find any significance. So most of the employment quality effect comes from the monetary incentives, how much you compensate for the employees. Then we also look at the mechanism in terms of, inalienability. I will rush. So we see under what situations in cross-border deals, the inalienability may be high or maybe low. So we look at a few empirical measures, proxies for the uncertainty. So repeat entrepreneur, target country's remuneration culture, economic nationalism, whether the target country is left-wing or right-wing, strength of the labor union, and whether the deal is conducted in the low-tech industries. So what we find is that all these measures regarding the uncertainty of integrated employment policies, the lower the uncertainty is, the less the attenuating effect is in cross-border deals. But if we interact this employment quality score with the labor regulation difference between the target country and the acquired country, we don't see any results. So this is not really driven by the regulation, but it's more driven by the firm level engagement. So we conduct other robustness checks. I'm going to skip. We look at culture, human rights, common language, etc. So all those things you can think of. I also find that the effects is not driven by target firms' employment policy, but more by acquired firms' employment policy. Finally, if we look at the long-run operating performance, it's consistent with short-run stock returns. So for the sake of time, I'm going to stop here, and this is our conclusion. Look forward to the discussion. Thanks.
Okay, many thanks for the presentation and the discussion. Is Henry Huntsman.
This is next. Okay, and this is back. All right, ready to go. The authors here have taken on a very ambitious project. There have been studies over the years, theoretical and empirical, about labor involvement in corporate governance. They have reached no clear conclusion. It's very hard to do empirical work in this area. And so, as with most of corporate governance, we don't have definitive results. In fact, much thinner results than we have concerning things like independent directors and so forth. So here's an effort to find a methodology and actually get some results on valuing the contribution that workers can make to the firm. Let me put it in that general term. The introduction, the authors in their introduction emphasize corporate worker involvement in corporate control. Co-determination, other director appointment rights, employee stock option plans, works councils, and that sort of thing. But their data don't include that. They don't do empirical work on anything involving employee control. They look just at workplace conditions, the conditions provided for the employees by the company, and seek to see whether or not there is some difference, some value to them. In particular, they look for shareholder value. They concentrate on four measures of general measures of employee. They call it engagement. The paper has the word engagement in the title. Engagement sounds like it has something to do with control, but that's not the meaning of it here. Engagement means workplace conditions provided by the employer. And they break them into four different categories, as the source of the data does itself, as they've explained. Employment quality is one of them. That's really wages and compensation, and a few other things that don't slightly different from that. In effect, as the was just explained to you at the end of the presentation before, employment quality here just measures compensation, effectively. Compensation in pay and bonuses and so forth. Second is health and safety. How safe is the workplace? Third is workforce diversity. Does the company discriminate on the grounds of gender or sexual orientation or race or ethnicity or whatever? Or does it seek affirmatively to rid itself of those kinds of discrimination? And the final is training and development, workplace training, and such as that. Does the firm provide any of these things? Well, these are standardized into scores from 0 to 100 for each of the 4 different categories here. And I want to raise a question here. I think it was just answered, but I take it that this database, which we've seen before, is not voluntary. There's not a selection problem here in where Thomson Reuters gets its data. But I'll leave the authors to respond clearly to me on that. But I take it that we don't have it, that Thomson Reuters does the selection of the firms, and it does it randomly. The authors talk about inalienability a good bit in the paper, less in the talk. The authors, as I stated, they proceed, quote, by focusing on a key issue in corporate finance, namely the inalienability of human capital. And they offer a definition of inalienability here. Inalienability stands for the fact that, for example, in the case of acquisition, a buyer of a firm cannot change the human capital employed at a target company without frictions, nor can it change the contracts that a target firm has voluntarily adopted. They seem to be having 2 things in mind here. One is the worker can't sell their capabilities. If you have certain capabilities, the firm can't buy those separate from you. And the second is that the acquirer and the target employees, they're looking at mergers here. The target employees are tied to the target by contractual agreements, explicit and implicit, but the explicit ones at least can't be broken. And that's surely true. The word, I have no problem with the concepts. The problem is the word, I think, inalienability, which seems not to capture very well what they're trying to get at, which is, I think, better called inflexibility. That is, that workplace relationships in a target company may cause difficulties when they try to integrate those persons into the acquiring company. I think that's the basic notion that they have in mind here. The methodology here deserves a moment's reflection, I think. The effort is here to detect whether or not how the shareholders value any and all of those 4 types of employee engagement. So the exercise is to find out how shareholders value the effect upon market price of stock in particular, how shareholders value each of these 4 different types of workplace conditions. How might that affect shareholder value? Well, if the workers like they benefit from training and employment, they want to be trained up and they feel satisfied. They're happier. They're more content. They work harder. If they're well trained, that might reflect itself in shareholder value. Workers may charge less or produce more, and therefore that would reflect itself in what shareholders are willing to pay for the stock of the company, and it would be the shareholder value of training and development in the workplace. So, the effort is to squeeze out the way shareholders value having these different features of employment relationships at the firm they own. How are they going to do it? They're focusing on cumulative abnormal returns upon merger announcements. Here they're creating an event and doing an event study around that event. But it's not the event itself that they are interested in. It's background conditions at the firm, and especially the acquiring firm that they're looking at. They have data on cumulative abnormal returns only on the acquiring firm, not on the target firm for most firms. So, so how does it proceed? So the idea is that a merger is announced. That's the event date. Merger is announced, and there are assumed to be 2 surprises here. One is the announcement date of the merger. the shareholders don't know when a company's going to announce that it's about in which they own stock is going to make an announcement of a merger. And secondly, they don't know about the labor conditions, these 4 criteria or other labor conditions, at the target firm until the announcement is made. Then, within a 3-day window, that means really within a day or a day and a half after the announcement, the stock market is going to respond to the announcement of the merger, and the CAR is going to be revealed. And that is going to reflect the value of the merger, of course, the unexpected value of the merger to the shareholders, and it's going to impound work relations into it. Not work relationships in general, because of course it wouldn't reflect anything if we were just looking at the workplace conditions at the acquiring firm. Those are constant. The shareholders of the firm know those conditions, and nothing's going to be revealed about them. And when it makes announces a merger deal coming up, so that's not what's going to happen. But rather, they're going to look at what might happen, or what the authors look at here, is that there's going to be some interaction between the workplace conditions at the target firm and the workplace conditions at the acquiring firm. And this will be the surprising thing, the unexpected thing, which will lead to cumulative abnormal returns, one way or the other. And they might be favorable, it might be unfavorable. So we'll come back and say a few words about this, but this is what's being looked at here, as I understand it. And so the stock market is given a day to react to this and puzzle out all the various things that might be valuable about a merger, this among them. And with the hope is that with enough data and adequate control variables, by examining these CARs, you'll be able to squeeze out from them the significance and maybe the numerical estimate of the importance of workplace conditions for the employees. Let me get to the results of these regressions first, and then we'll go back and take a look at them again a little more closely. The results, the authors, they're running CARs against workplace conditions at the acquiring firm as well as at the target firm. And they find that actually the only thing that predicts here is the first of the 4 labor relations variables that they had. And in fact, only part of that. It's only the employment compensation elements that predict. So what shows up in these CARs, or what shows up in the regressions, is that companies that pay their employees better are more valued by their shareholders. And the shareholder value is higher, shareholders have bid up the price of their stock, if the company itself has treats its employees better, has better material conditions for the workplace. Really compensation, not workplace virtues itself. So one might think this requires some faith in a rather exotic extension of a methodology here. As I say, we don't have a direct observation of anything in the acquiring firm here. It's only looked at through interactions with the target firm. These are CARs in one-day CARs in a firm where lots of other things are driving the CAR. Presumably, if it's to the extent it's observable. We're looking at CARs in acquisitions for the acquiring firm. We know that most of the surplus goes to the target firm, but the authors don't have data for target firm CARs. Many of the firms are private firms that are being acquired. They only have public firms, which is the acquiring firms. And so you would think there's an awful lot of noise, just a terrific amount of noise in this, even if these figures, even if they could be even if it were logical to think that they would show you the right thing. And it's not clear that they would. They show you interaction effects between the two firms, employment policies, if anything, but don't really show you the ongoing value of providing good workplace conditions for your workers. That's not what the CARs are measuring. Those you already know, or that those aren't going to change anyway. So it's a slightly odd procedure, and one which, so it's an odd procedure itself, and even if it were, the assumptions needed to drive it were all accurate, it would be surprising if it would yield results, I think. And the result it gets is odd too. That is, it finds that the only factor of the various measures of employee welfare or employee job conditions that it finds important is how much you pay the workers. And this is measuring this in terms of shareholder value, how much shareholders appreciate it. It's not clear that just paying your workers more is going to drive the stock price up. But that seems to be the direct implication of the results here. So, so it seems odd, and well, I've said everything on this slide. Let me offer another interpretation of the author's results. Suppose it's the case that unusually prosperous firms, the Googles and Amazons and Facebooks and Microsofts of the world, have a clever idea or a network or a platform or something like that, which can be used to increase the value of other operations. So that when Google runs around and acquires another firm, it's got in place a huge network, a huge platform that can increase the value of target firms it buys. And also it treats its own workers well. So Google, we know Google treats its own workers very well. It makes them more productive by whatever virtues the founders of Google and their employees deploy. That is to say, when Google hires somebody, they make them productive, and they're generous in sharing that productivity, those rents, with the employees. So Google has unusually highly paid employees, and let us suppose. And when they acquire a new firm, they do it because they can make that firm pay off a lot more than that firm was paying off before, because they've got their, whatever it is that makes Google great, their network, their platform, their brilliant engineers, are going to make that target firm worthwhile too. And so here we've got Google. It pays its employees very well. It shares its rents with employees because it doesn't want to lose employees. And it also occasionally it announces, from time to time, it announces that it's going to take over another firm, acquire another firm. And the share price gets a little boost at those occasions, maybe, because we didn't know, the shareholders didn't know at that point that there's going to be an announcement made, but we do know that that when Google takes over a firm, it produces rents for Google. So so you run CARs against. So you find a little bump, a little abnormal return when Google makes an announcement at some random time that it's going to buy a target firm. Now we've got all the elements of the author's results here. The correlation between high paid workers and positive CARs when another firm is taken over. And the non-Googles of the world won't have this combination, so it's going to show up, this is going to drive the author's results. This, I suggest, is a more plausible interpretation of what's going on, and it doesn't require anything strange being reflected in the CARs or teasing out employment workplace conditions from all the other things that might affect a CAR. And my alternative theory may be right or it may be wrong. It's consistent with all the other results that the authors find, as far as I can tell. But I offer it to show that there are other, doesn't take long to think of other more plausible interpretations of the author's results than the one they offer. so let me just pause at that for a moment. So, so we have an empirical methodology here which seems highly attenuated, and maybe it'd be good for the authors to pause a bit and think a little bit harder about whether or not there might be other explanations for this, or start off with falsifying my alternative explanation for it. How can you choose between these alternatives? There's a question of how am I doing on time here? Out? Okay. I will skip the rest of it here and say, wind up. Perhaps a little more caution is called for in interpreting the data, and that's it. Thank you.
Okay, many thanks. How, Cara, you want to respond?
Okay. Well, thank you for the comments. I'll start off with coming to your comment about ACID4 database. Indeed, companies do not choose to be included. It's Thomson that looks at the biggest indices and chooses the companies from these indices. So the companies have no say whatsoever in whether they are included or not. I also agree with the fact that inalienability may indicate several things. So I can agree with using inflexibility, for example, in our paper. With regard to the cars, I think we would argue that they measure shareholders' perceptions of whether the acquirer's employee policies can be integrated, so the target's employee policies can be integrated into the acquiring firm, and to what extent the acquirer's employee policies can create value and motivate the target's employees to commit to the firm. That's our argument for the cars. I think your last comment basically comes down to, well, a causality argument. We try to take this into account by using an IV estimation as well, which in the interest of time wasn't included here in the presentation. And for that we use the acquiring firm's peers' salaries and wages expenses as an IV for the acquirer's employee policies. So we try to take into account this causality argument somewhat by using this IV estimation. I think these are my main answers to your remarks. Thank you.
Okay, further questions? Jeff?
Yeah, I have a kind of first a fact question. How does the data supplier get the information that it has? Because this is pretty detailed information about employee pay and other such things, which in the U.S. case I've tried in some areas seems not available to get. So how does, particularly since if they got it with the survey, then presumably the firm would have a choice whether to opt in or not, but you say it's not a choice, so it's not a survey, so how possibly can they get this data on a firm-specific level? I mean, all right, BLS might have it on, the industry level, but firm-specific, how do they get the data, at least in the US? Secondly, if the goal is to try to measure does this particular way of treating employees create value or not, why not just do it directly? Why not just use a Q, Tobin's Q, right? I mean, the claim is these are high quality relations with employees, it'll create value, it creates value with a merger. Well, guess what? It ought to create value in the firm generally, which ought to be directly reflected in Tobin's Q. So it seems like you're pursuing a rather indirect way, which runs into the, what Henry said about alternative stories. Whereas if that's really you're trying to measure the extent to which favorable employee policies create value, again, why not just do it directly with the pretty common way, the ways we have of measuring the value of the firm through that channel.
Okay, with regard to the first remark, all the data that Thomson Reuters collects is based on public information. So it could be newspaper articles, just balance sheets, annual reports, CSR reports. So if it has the information, it was public at some point. It's not based on surveys. So, and it's an international sample, so I assume for some countries, this wage information may be more available than in the US. And with regard to the second question, I think what we're trying to capture is basically the transferability of employee policies. To what extent can the acquirers and the target's employee policies can be integrated, and can the incentivization of employees be transferred to the target firm?
Maybe I can add on a little bit on the second point. Actually, at a certain point, we did try this Tobin's Q, the simple regression Tobin's Q on employment, employee engagement. Apparently, we also suffer from all kinds of endogeneity issues. And I think that result itself was also not surprising given what some other people using other data set on firm level employees and country level labor regulations found. But what we want to emphasize in this paper is, we found some contrasting results. That's also a response to Henry's comments that there is a difference between domestic deal and cross-border deal. I think it's not only about incentivizing employees, but also, if you incentivize employees in different conditions, the effects may be different. And I think that's the innovation we're going to pursue in this paper, rather than simply looking at whether it's positive or negative in general, simply by running a regression on Q.
Okay, Maria, so that, oh, sorry.
So since your effect goes through the wages, my interpretation is that the firms with higher marginal productivity of labor are, when they acquire, they produce more synergy gains. And I'm wondering whether there is something special about labor, or is total factor productivity in general. So if I were you, I would compute the solo residuals and try to look for a horse race, because I think that what you are finding is a bit different from these people who say that employee policies, so that type of corporate social responsibility matters. Is to some extent more believable from an economic point of view is the marginal productivity of labor, and if you have higher productivity, also when you expand your assets, they are going to have higher productivity.
Okay, so thanks. I think that's definitely something we can try out. And in the past, we did some tests, not directly on that, but we did run a horse race of this employee dimension versus other types of social environment and governance dimensions. And we found that actually this is the most significant ones.
But the other measure of corporate social responsibility have nothing to do with total.
Yeah. So there is some non-overlapping part.
Talking more Econ 101.
Yeah. Okay.
Two questions. First question is that when you say the human capital inalienability, does it include the farm-specific aspects? Yeah, please.
No, I think the definition itself is more general. So I think it's just whether you can really separate the physical person with their human capital skills.
Yeah, I was wondering that your meaning of the inability of human capital may differ on industry by industry. So that's my first point. And my second question is besides the work condition or salary, your statistics show that cross-border merger have a negative effect of share.
Yeah.
What is your hypothetical story?
No, so that's exactly the inalienability idea. So if, for example, if a Japanese firm acquire another Japanese firm, given that employee contracts are similar, cultures are similar, so it's more easy to integrate. But whereas a Japanese firm going to the U.S., given all the differences in this cross-border nature, so this actually becomes a burden for the firm. But this is not the cross-border itself, because we found the cross-border has a positive coefficient. It's more about this uncertainty of integrating workforce that drives our results.
Yeah, that result is very surprising for me.
It was also
that's
surprising for
contrary to my hypothesis.
Okay.
I would say, particularly in Japan, the I would say, only when foreign company acquire Japanese company,
Okay.
Japanese company can change.
Okay.
Otherwise, even though the Japanese company purchased the Japanese company, not significant change. That's an impression for many Japanese practitioners. So
Okay.
the significant value increase merger should be cross-border. That's
Okay.
kind of my impression.
Okay.
You said that you are, what you're finding is the ability of the company to integrate those labor forces or policies. I think more correctly, you would have to say what you're finding is the extent to which the acquirer management has misjudged its ability to integrate, or correctly judged, not more precisely, to what extent the market has to update their assessment of the ability of the management to do what, to integrate these two firms. Once you look at it that way, your estimates became at least as difficult to interpret and at least as much endogeneity as with Tobin's Q regressions, because of course these mergers, they don't happen they don't fall from the sky. They are planned. And if you get, for example, when I look at your regressions and there's like a negative coefficient on the cross-border stuff, well, that must mean that some firms apparently have negative CARs when they announce these mergers, so they are probably making a mistake, or at least they're not doing as well as the market thought they would do. I mean, it's all, these triple reflections of expectations and so on. I don't actually know how to interpret this at all with respect to your baseline question, which is, are these employee engagement things good or bad?
Just a follow-up. Yeah, so my comments were actually very in line with Holger's. That's why, before your response, I wanted to jump in. I think, again, the selection bias could be an issue, because the firms that are engaging in cross-border mergers are very different than those that are acquiring domestic. So I was wondering, maybe just at least running like a Heckman selection regression, or sort of controlling for all those. I don't know, there's many alternatives that you can employ. But if this is obviously very counterintuitive results. So you're basically telling us that an acquirer that is bringing better employee sort of conditions is being punished by shareholders, and that's, I don't know if you're going to go from if your results still stand after controlling for selection. I don't know if that means that you're going to go through the stakeholder versus shareholder theory, but even regardless, I think, why wouldn't it be that this adjustment thing is not really selling it? Because if you look at the corporate governance, Wang and Xia has this corporate governance. They acquire this domestic study, but there they show that if the acquirer has better corporate governance, that it does reflect on sort of better cards, sort of higher cards. So in this case, I don't know how you would reconcile your findings with what has been shown in terms of corporate governance.
Shall I respond to both? Yeah, so just very quickly, we did run a Heckman in terms of, the relation between the probability of conducting a takeover and the firm's employee score, and the coefficients are very trivial, economically very trivial. And also, I think in terms of how the market how the investors misjudge, we do find that those cross-border deals, so doing cross-border deal itself is related to higher value, higher shareholder value. So again, this is not an effect of cross-border deal per se, but we do observe that companies conducting cross-border deals, on average, they have a higher employment score. But running regression between doing this Heckman test, show between the takeover probability and those scores didn't give us a very strong results. So it's not really, I'm not quite sure whether this fully addressed the endogeneity issue, but hopefully they partially go in that direction.
Okay, for the sake of time, one last round of questions. Morea, Mike, and Alexander.
Okay, just a conceptual point back to Hart Moore. So inalienability of human capital, all human capital is inalienable. So I don't understand this at all. The crucial thing is how much do I contribute to the venture or to the other party? How important is the employer to the firm? And what is also important is how good are my outside options? So if I'm very general, when I have good outside options, so when it's not clear when the firm may want to pay me much, at the same time, if I have very general skills, I can be easily replaced because these are general skills. If I'm very specific skills, then I'm maybe very important to the firm, but at the same time, my outside options are not so good because the skills are very similar. So I just completely at loss how this inalienability thingy and Hart Moore matches into higher or lower incentive pays, since that's the only relevant.
Maybe you want to respond quickly?
Okay, I mean, I agree there is much to think about this inalienability. And in our, probably, I mean, as what Harry suggests, we probably can also rephrase it as flexibility. But we haven't thought about this outside option thing. But to us, it's more about, two firms, if they want to merge, how likely that they can merge the employment policy rather than, how likely they can retain the talents, but more they can make the policy consistent between the firms. But I do agree that retaining talents and thinking about those people's outside option would be an important scope.
So in the interest of time, let me make a comment and a suggestion rather than ask a question. The comment is that these announcement returns are impossible to interpret in this context. And this is not news. So the M&A literature has confronted this problem for a very long time. Announcement returns are going to combine 4 effects, of which synergies is one, and the others are overpayments, news about the bidder's standalone value, its management up to the job and so on, and the probability that the deal will successfully complete. So to say that what you're measuring here is capturing synergies of any kind is impossible. Now, the suggestion is that there's a nice paper in the RFS by Bob Whaley and co-authors in 2013, which shows you how you can use other prices, in particular option prices, to isolate the synergy element of this. So once you've done that, I think you can make progress. But with announcement returns on their own, you have nothing that you can interpret here.
Thanks.
Morea?
Just a suggestion to understand as well the surprising result. Maybe you would want to explore any labor restructuring effects after the deals, if they are actually capturing and keeping these high-valued employees.
Okay.
And you may want to get maybe some inspiration with this new JFE forthcoming, the Dessin, Gobulov, and Volpin, that they talk about labor restructuring and takeovers.
Yeah, thanks.